The cabin of Flight 781 hummed with the monotonous whir of the jet engines, the ordinary rhythm that usually lulled passengers into the illusion of safety. But tonight, nothing felt ordinary. Outside, the Texas plains stretched endlessly, bathed in the molten glow of a setting sun, while the horizon blurred into streaks of violet and orange. Inside, a storm of nerves simmered beneath polite small talk, the nervous shuffles of passengers' feet, the clinking of soda cans, the low hum of whispered conversations. Amid it all, one passenger remained unnervingly still. A woman, perhaps in her late 30s, dressed in a leather jacket and dark aviator sunglasses, sat rigid yet calm in seat 17D. Her hair was tied back in a severe braid, and her posture radiated the confidence of someone used to being unseen yet always in control. She had boarded the plane with the quiet precision of a professional, moving swiftly, efficiently, as if her life depended on leaving no trace. Passengers noticed her, of course. Children nudged their parents, adults stole furtive glances, and even the flight attendants gave her polite, curious nods. But she offered nothing in return, no small talk, no nervous smile, no sigh of exasperation at the tiny inconveniences of flying. Her hands rested lightly on her lap, fingers twitching occasionally, as if testing an invisible pulse that no one else could feel. The flight had been uneventful until the radar lights on the cockpit screen shifted. The captain frowned, eyes narrowing at the display. Two fast-moving blips had appeared, closing on Flight 781 at impossible speed. "What the hell?" the co-pilot muttered under his breath, voice tight with disbelief. The captain leaned closer to the instruments, the cabin crew oblivious to the danger closing in. "F-16s, he said, his voice low and tense. "They're closing in fast. Civilian plane or not, they're treating us like a target." The passengers remained unaware of the imminent danger. Some were scrolling on phones, others craning to see the sky from the small oval windows. Only a few had noticed the sharp silhouettes racing outside the clouds, but none of them noticed the woman. She didn't turn her head to look, didn't blink or shift. She merely adjusted her posture, straightening her spine with the quiet authority of someone about to take control of a situation most would panic over. Minutes felt like hours. The first F-16 streaked across the sky, its shadow slicing across the fuselage like a jagged scar. The passengers instinctively grabbed armrests, some leaning into each other in fear, while others whispered prayers under their breath. The captain keyed the intercom, voice trembling despite his efforts to remain calm. "Flight 781, this is your captain. We have two military jets approaching. Please remain calm." But it was already too late. The jets were not waiting for calm. They flanked the plane, forcing it into a gentle but unmistakable maneuver to alter course. Panic rippled through the cabin. Some passengers clutched seatbacks, white-knuckled. Others turned pale, lips pressed together to suppress screams. Yet among the chaos, one figure remained completely serene. The woman's eyes, hidden behind reflective lenses, betrayed nothing, but inside she was calculating. Every move, every approach, every radio transmission was being measured, processed, and catalogued. This was not her first encounter with the military. Not by a long shot. Her fingers flexed subtly on her lap, a tiny movement unnoticed by anyone except perhaps the universe itself, preparing for a moment that would change everything. The radio crackled suddenly and the cabin went still, ears straining. A voice boomed, clear and uncompromising. "Flight 781, identify yourself immediately. You are in restricted airspace. State your purpose." The passengers froze. The captain's hand hovered over the microphone, hesitating. This is Flight 781. We're a civilian jet en route to Denver. The F-16s pressed closer, one cutting directly over the nose of the plane, casting a long, dark shadow over the fuselage. The pilots inside those fighter jets didn't know what they were about to encounter. They didn't know that the passenger who had been silent for hours was about to change everything. She spoke, one word, clear, deliberate, and unyielding. Phantom. The cabin went still as if gravity itself had paused. Passengers exchanged glances, some confused, some worried, others instinctively stepping back from the sheer authority in her tone. The F-16 pilots halted their approach, shocked. They recognized the call sign. Recognition turned into disbelief, then into hesitation, the kind of hesitation that could save or doom lives in seconds. Inside the plane, the woman leaned back slightly, a faint smirk touching her lips. She hadn't moved a muscle beyond that one declaration, but the message had been received, loud and unmistakable. Everyone else on the plane remained oblivious, but the tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to taste. The passengers continued to fidget, unaware of the invisible hand guiding the scenario. Some whispered questions. Others nervously checked phones, scrolling for news that hadn't yet arrived. But the silence of their mysterious neighbor only grew heavier, more ominous. The co-pilot leaned over the captain. "Did you hear that?" he asked, voice low, trembling. Who said that?" The captain shook his head, confused and anxious. I don't know. Seat 17D, woman in the leather jacket." The woman's smirk deepened, but still no one truly understood her presence, her identity, or her power. Outside, the fighter jets hovered, engines roaring, wings slicing the upper sky, waiting, watching, uncertain. And just like that, the ordinary flight had transformed into something extraordinary, something dangerous, something that would be retold with awe by those who would later hear of it. The tension in the cabin was no longer a background note. It was the drumbeat of a story that had only just begun. The sky darkened beyond the clouds, shadows stretching over the passengers' anxious faces. And as the first hints of night crept into the cabin, a single, unspoken question lingered. Who was this woman, and what could she possibly do to command silence from trained fighter pilots? The silence in the cabin became a living entity, thick enough to press against every chest, making hearts pound with the anticipation of something none of the passengers could yet see. Outside, the F-16s maintained their hold, jet engines screaming through the thinning stratosphere, each movement precise and threatening. The military pilots inside the cockpits weren't expecting hesitation. Civilian airspace rarely warranted such a display, yet there it was, a pause, heavy and unnatural, triggered by a single call sign. Phantom. Inside Flight 781, the captain's hands trembled on the controls. "I've never seen them hesitate like this," he muttered, his voice low, almost to himself. He glanced toward the woman in 17D, but she remained calm, serene, as if time had no power over her. What is that?" the co-pilot asked, eyes wide. His voice betrayed a mix of awe and fear. Before the captain could answer, a shadow flickered across the cabin. One of the F-16s had shifted into position above the nose of the plane, its silhouette casting a moving darkness across the passengers. Children cried, clutching their parents, while the more composed passengers stared in disbelief at the streaking fighter jet, engines roaring like thunder. The metallic gleam reflected off the windows, giving the impression that the sky itself was breaking into shards of steel and fire. The woman finally moved, subtly. She reached for the small, slim black case at her side and opened it with deliberate slowness. Inside was a headset, military-grade, designed for communication at altitudes that could crush a normal human ear. She slipped it on, and the cabin seemed to grow colder, quieter. Something shifted in the atmosphere, the kind of silent recognition that even the most untrained eye could feel. She spoke again, barely above a whisper, yet the words carried weight that defied physics. "Falcon 6, I'm airborne." The F-16 pilots froze mid-maneuver. Recognition passed between them faster than words could travel. One of the lead pilots, voice trembling, broke radio silence. "Falcon 6. Is that? No, it can't be." The other jets adjusted their formation, hesitation now clearly visible through the fluidity of their movements. Flight 781, once ordinary, had become a chessboard, and the woman in seat 17D was the player no one expected. Inside the cabin, the passengers remained unaware of the unfolding recognition. Their attention was drawn only to the visible threat, the fighter jets, their shadows crawling over the fuselage, the thrum of engines shaking the floor beneath their feet. Some whispered frantic prayers. Others prayed silently, thinking this was the beginning of a disaster. Yet the calm woman offered nothing, no reassurance, no panic, no explanation. The captain's knuckles were white against the yoke. "Do we respond? Do we?" His words trailed off. The cockpit radio crackled again, and the message was clear, concise, but tinged with the same hesitation. "Flight 781, state your intentions immediately. You are being monitored." The woman's hand hovered over the case again. She picked up a slim device, tapped a few buttons, and then looked out the window. "You know why I'm here," she said softly into the headset. The pilots outside shifted uneasily. One of them whispered into the comms, She's been offline for years, thought she was retired." And then the plane lurched. The turbulence wasn't caused by weather. It was a deliberate maneuver from above. The lead F-16 swooped slightly closer, forcing Flight 781 into a gentle banking turn. Panic swept through the cabin, passengers gripping armrests and each other. Drinks sloshed over cup holders, a soda can rolled down the aisle, and a child screamed, the sound echoing like a warning bell in the confined space. Yet the woman did not flinch. Calm radiated from her like a shield, an invisible force field that seemed to push the panic around her rather than letting it touch her. The captain finally broke. "Ma'am, do you know them?" he asked hesitantly, nodding toward the aggressive jets outside. She finally turned her gaze toward him, the faintest smile playing on her lips, the kind that suggested she had rehearsed this exact scenario in her mind countless times. "I know them. They know me." The cockpit fell silent. The words were simple, but in them was the weight of a lifetime spent in situations where one misstep meant death. She wasn't just any pilot. She had been part of the most elite operations, the kind whispered about in Pentagon hallways but never spoken of publicly. She had a call sign, Phantom, known to a select few. Recognition by the F-16 pilots outside meant her presence alone commanded caution, hesitation, respect, and fear. The tension escalated as the jets attempted another maneuver. This time, the lead F-16 shifted slightly to the left, signaling an attempt to guide the civilian aircraft away from restricted airspace. But Flight 781 did not comply in the way the pilots expected. "Don't provoke them," the woman whispered into the headset. Her calm was disarming, almost tangible. She hadn't moved the yoke, hadn't issued a command, yet the entire dynamic of the interception shifted. The F-16s now hesitated, unsure whether to continue their aggressive stance. A sudden loud bang echoed through the cabin. Not an explosion, but the vibration of a high-altitude jet maneuver, the kind that makes even experienced travelers clutch their seats. Panic surged, a tidal wave of noise and fear. Passengers screamed, some even cried out for mercy, but she remained still, an anchor amidst chaos. Then, as if to reassure the unseen watchers, she tapped the microphone on her headset again. "You've made the right choice by pausing," she said firmly, every word commanding absolute authority. Outside, the jets finally adjusted, moving into a wider formation, giving Flight 781 the illusion of freedom. But the tension did not dissipate. The pilots' faces were pale behind their visors. They knew that one wrong decision could trigger an outcome none of them could predict, an outcome they were not prepared to face. Inside the cabin, passengers had no idea. To them, it was turbulence, fear, and confusion. To her, it was a carefully choreographed ballet of danger, every movement planned, every reaction anticipated. She had prepared for this moment for years, but nothing could erase the thrill of seeing it play out in real life. And as night fell across the Texas plains, the woman leaned back, her eyes hidden behind reflective lenses, watching the horizon. She was calm, but the storm outside, and inside the cockpit was far from over. Suspense ending. The F-16s have paused, giving Flight 781 temporary safety, but the woman's past, her identity, and the reason for this dangerous interception remain mysterious. The next move could change everything. The cabin had quieted, but not in relief. It was the kind of tense silence that feels like holding your breath underwater. You know a sudden gasp could shatter it at any moment. Flight attendants exchanged anxious glances, their training failing to fully prepare them for the unusual rhythm of fear pulsing through the plane. Passengers pressed faces to windows, searching for the jets that seemed to hover in some other layer of reality, a predator waiting for its prey. Yet amid all this, the woman in 17D remained calm, serene, a figure of unshakable composure. Her dark aviator sunglasses reflected the fading sunlight, but her eyes, hidden behind them, were alive with sharp calculation. She had been in situations far more dangerous than a couple of fighter jets blocking her path. She had been trained to remain invisible, to become a ghost in a world of threats. That call sign, Phantom, was more than just a name. It was a legacy, a shadow that haunted the corridors of the Pentagon and the clandestine offices of military intelligence. The captain, still gripping the yoke as if the life of everyone on board depended on it, glanced toward her again. "Ma'am," he asked cautiously, "are you military? Are you some kind of?" She didn't answer directly. Instead, she reached into her jacket pocket and withdrew a small laminated card, the edges worn from years of handling. She held it up to her lips and whispered into her headset, "Verification code Alpha 9 Tango." Outside, the F-16 formation shuddered as the lead pilot's fingers danced across the controls. They spoke rapidly into their radios, voices tense, commanding, hesitant. One pilot muttered under his breath, disbelief thick in his tone, "It's really her Phantom. I thought she retired years ago." The co-pilot in Flight 781 leaned toward the captain. What does that mean?" His voice quavered. "She's a fighter pilot." The woman turned slightly, finally letting a flicker of her eyes be seen behind the reflective lenses. There was a fire there, not anger but experience. She didn't need to speak to assert authority. Every movement she made radiated control. "Not just a pilot," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. "They know me for operations that don't exist on paper. They've been trained to fear me." The cabin was oblivious to the storm of recognition happening outside. Passengers' focus remained fixed on the looming shapes in the sky, unaware that they had been saved from a potentially catastrophic interception by a single, silent passenger. Drinks spilled, a child whimpered, and the flight attendants moved down the aisle with tense, cautious steps, the floor vibrating with each low hum of jet engines. Then came a sharp ping from the cockpit instruments, followed by a brief crackle over the intercom. "Flight 781, this is command. Do you copy?" The captain hesitated. "Copy, command. This is Flight 781. We are experiencing an unusual situation. 2 F-16s are intercepting us. We have a passenger." He stopped mid-sentence, the words faltering. How could he explain the presence of someone whose very name struck fear into trained fighter pilots? He looked at 17D. The woman, still calm, finally spoke to him directly. "Leave it to me. Just keep the plane steady." Outside, the F-16 pilots were scrambling, reassessing every maneuver. The name Phantom had recalibrated their perception of risk. A retired operative was now airborne in a civilian aircraft, but with skill and knowledge that rivaled any modern fighter. Hesitation turned into uncertainty. Should they proceed with interception? Could they challenge her without risking disaster? The turbulence intensified, but it was now a deliberate force. The woman subtly shifted her weight, her hands brushing the edge of her seat, and the aircraft responded with the micro-adjustments that only a master of flight could anticipate. Each maneuver kept Flight 781 balanced on the edge of chaos but within her control. A young woman seated across the aisle whispered nervously to her husband, Do Do you think she's a pilot? I've never seen anyone so calm." Her husband shook his head. "I don't know, maybe she works for the government." But neither of them could grasp the truth. Phantom was a legend whose missions were classified. The pilots outside had been briefed only in fragments, the memory of her skill and ruthlessness lingering like an echo in the corridors of military archives. The civilian world had no idea she existed, yet she now commanded a theater of tension high above the plains of Texas. The woman's fingers brushed the headset again. Her voice, low and unwavering, transmitted a single phrase: "Do not pursue. Let the civilian aircraft pass." Inside the F-16s, the response was immediate. Communications crackled with confusion and urgency. The lead pilot whispered sharply into the comms, hesitation heavy in his voice. "Copy, we're holding. She has authority here." Back in the cabin, the passengers were unaware of the recognition, the silent negotiations taking place above them. Their fear was raw and visible, but the calm presence of Phantom offered a subtle anchor, though none could name it. She had become their unseen protector. The sun dipped below the horizon, shadows stretching across the fuselage, painting the cabin in deep, shifting blues. Outside, the jets maintained a cautious perimeter, a dance of steel and speed that only the most skilled pilots could execute without catastrophe. The woman finally leaned back, her eyes scanning the passengers for the first time since the incident began. Their expressions were a mixture of fear and wonder, completely unaware of how close they had come to disaster, or how their lives were now quietly in the hands of someone extraordinary. Then the cockpit radio crackled again. This time the voice was from the lead F-16, tense but respectful. "Phantom, we are standing down. You are cleared." The word carried weight like thunder across the silent airwaves. The woman's calm didn't waver, but a flicker of satisfaction crossed her face. She hadn't spoken much, but in those few moments she had asserted complete control. Yet the danger was far from over. Recognition by the F-16 pilots was only the first wave. Questions remained. Why was she on this civilian flight? Why now? And what or who had prompted her to emerge from the shadows of retirement? The passengers leaned against seats and windows, shivering from adrenaline they couldn't fully understand. The woman's presence remained an enigma, her aura commanding but incomprehensible. Outside, the jets maintained their careful orbit, as if they too were holding their breath. And as darkness finally claimed the sky, a quiet tension settled over Flight 781, deeper than fear, anticipation. Something bigger than this interception was looming. A story of secrets, skill, and danger that would unfold in ways no one aboard the plane could yet imagine. Suspense ending. Phantom has established control, the F-16s have retreated, but her presence on Flight 781, the reason for the military alert, and the hidden threat looming beyond the horizon remain shrouded in mystery. The passengers are safe for now, but only temporarily. The cabin of Flight 781 had settled into a deceptive calm. The roar of the F-16s had faded, leaving only the hum of the jet engines and the anxious whispers of passengers still shaken by what they had glimpsed outside. Drinks sloshed in their cups, a child clutched a stuffed animal as if it could shield him from invisible threats, and a few passengers peeked repeatedly through the windows, hoping to see the jets disappear entirely. Yet the most important presence in the plane, the woman in seat 17D, remained an island of absolute composure. Her sunglasses reflected the dim cabin lights, hiding the sharp calculation in her eyes. She wasn't merely calm, she was vigilant. Every sound, every vibration, every micro-change in altitude was being cataloged, analyzed, anticipated. Phantom had flown under more dangerous skies than this. Years of missions, some so classified they didn't officially exist, had honed her instincts to a preternatural edge. And though she hadn't spoken much, she was already orchestrating a solution for a threat that few even understood existed. The captain, still tense and sweating, finally broke the silence. "Ma'am," he said cautiously, "I need to know, are you authorized military? What's going on?" Phantom's hand brushed the edge of her seat, fingertips lightly tapping the leather. She leaned toward him just enough to let her voice cut through the tension without alarming the passengers. "I'm authorized for situations like this," she said quietly. "I've retired from official duty, but the people outside, those pilots, they still know me. Recognition isn't casual, it's instinct. They know the risks of crossing me." The co-pilot's jaw dropped. "Crossing you? You're some kind of super pilot." Phantom's smile was faint but carried authority. "Not just a pilot. I've flown missions no one on this plane would believe. Missions that saved lives you'll never hear about. And those F-16s. They're trained to respond to me, not to any civilian plane." The cabin shivered collectively as a sudden bump of turbulence rattled the fuselage. Passengers cried out, hands gripping armrests, phones dropped. Some began muttering prayers. Phantom remained unmoved. Her calm was magnetic, almost unnerving. Even the captain, seasoned in years of unpredictable situations, felt a subtle reassurance emanating from her. But the external threat wasn't gone. Her instincts screamed it. She leaned slightly to check the altimeter, her eyes flicking to the window. Outside, dark shapes, smaller, faster, and lower than the F-16s, skirted the edges of radar detection. Drones, sophisticated and silent, were beginning to close in, scanning, watching, gathering intelligence. The encounter with the F-16s had only been the opening move of something larger. "Ma'am," the captain whispered, almost afraid to speak, What do we do? Should we prepare for?" She cut him off softly but firmly. "No one needs to panic, but you must follow instructions exactly. Do not engage. Do not communicate unnecessarily over the radios, and above all, trust me." Trust. It was a word that resonated strangely in the enclosed cabin, where fear was thick and eyes constantly flicked to her for answers. No one on board knew who she was. They only sensed the unshakable authority in her presence, the kind that makes people follow without understanding why. Phantom's fingers lightly traced the edge of the laminated card she had shown earlier. Its surface was scratched and faded from years of handling. On it was her call sign, code identifiers, and emergency verification protocols. To the average observer, it was meaningless. To trained military eyes, it was lethal. Every F-16 pilot she had faced, every reconnaissance team, every mission handler knew that card, those codes, and the woman behind them. A sudden ping from the cockpit instruments drew her attention. A radar anomaly blinked faintly on the secondary screen. The drones outside were approaching faster than expected. Phantom's lips pressed into a thin line. She had anticipated some reconnaissance, but this was aggressive, precise, and unusual. Someone was escalating the stakes intentionally. She adjusted her headset. Her voice, calm but commanding, carried a tone that immediately stopped further commotion. "Falcon 6 to Flight Command," she said softly, letting her voice crackle over secure channels she knew only the intercept pilots could hear. "Identify any drones or unauthorized vehicles in this airspace. Report directly to me." The cockpit crackled. Outside, the F-16 pilots hesitated, their fingers frozen on the yokes. Recognition, respect, and fear combined to make them uncertain. One whispered to the other, "She's alive, and she's still the best of them." Meanwhile, the passengers were oblivious to this high-stakes exchange. To them, the turbulence and the hum of engines were terrifying enough. Some whispered frantic theories, a rogue pilot, a hijacker. The fear in the cabin was raw, uninformed, and mounting. And yet the woman's calm remained a strange balm against the panic. Her aura was magnetic, almost hypnotic, commanding attention without anyone understanding why. The sun had completely set, leaving the plane bathed in the soft glow of instrument panels and passing city lights below. Night brought an added intensity, the shadows of the clouds stretching like fingers across the fuselage, darkness bleeding into the cabin. Phantom studied the dark horizon through the cockpit window, calculating angles, trajectories, and timing with a precision born from decades of high-risk operations. She finally spoke aloud to the cabin, not to alarm but to anchor them. "We're going to land safely. Trust the crew, trust the plane, and trust me." The words were simple, but they resonated with an authority that no passenger could articulate. Some still clutched armrests. Others swallowed hard, the tension tightening their throats. Every eye flicked to 17D, where the woman exuded the quiet power of someone who had danced with death more times than most would in a lifetime. A sudden vibration shook the plane again, this time not from turbulence. It was subtle but deliberate, a reminder from outside that the danger had not passed. The drones were closer, and someone somewhere had made a move that was calculated to test her limits. Phantom's fingers tapped against the laminated card once more. Her eyes, sharp beneath the sunglasses, scanned every detail visible through the windows. She knew the next move would be decisive. One wrong action by those outside, or by her, could trigger a chain of events none of the passengers would survive. And just as the tension peaked, she finally allowed a flicker of expression, a faint, controlled smile not of relief but of anticipation. She had faced impossible odds before. She had survived impossible missions, and she would survive this. Suspense ending. The woman in 17D has revealed hints of her extraordinary past to the captain. The external threat has escalated with drones entering the airspace, and the passengers are on the brink of discovering that their flight is no longer routine. But the full danger and the reason for her presence remain a secret. Night had fully claimed the sky, stretching a velvet darkness over the plane as Flight 781 cut through it like a silver blade. Inside the cabin, passengers were restless, nerves taut and voices hushed. The sudden lull after the F-16's retreat had given them only a fleeting sense of safety. Drinks sat untouched in cup holders, phones were clutched for distraction, and whispers of "what is happening" drifted through the cabin like smoke. But they still had no idea what lay ahead. The woman in 17D, Phantom, remained seated, sunglasses reflecting the dim overhead lights. Her posture was poised, yet every muscle was coiled in readiness. She had assessed the situation, analyzed every potential threat, and prepared contingencies. But what had just appeared on the radar demanded immediate action. Multiple fast-moving objects were converging from the west. The drones weren't alone. They were supported by small, tactical aircraft, unregistered, moving with the precision of military training. Phantom's fingers tapped the laminated card once more, a small, deliberate gesture that seemed insignificant but was actually a signal to operators who knew her protocols. Her voice, calm but commanding, broke the tense hush. Flight 781 remained seated. Brace for minor turbulence. Do not panic. The captain swallowed hard. Minor turbulence, ma'am, there. They're testing us, she interrupted gently. Her tone had the authority of someone who had lived through countless crises. They know I'm here. They want to gauge response. Trust me, follow instructions exactly. The plane will remain stable. The co-pilot exchanged a glance, eyes wide. Do we know why they're after her? The passengers had begun to notice subtle shifts, shadows flitting across the wing, unexplained blinking lights in the distance. Murmurs grew louder. One man, his voice shaky, asked the flight attendant, "Are we being followed?" The woman's voice, low and controlled, carried across the cabin again. "We are being monitored, but we are not in immediate danger. Keep calm. Keep the faith in those flying this aircraft." The plane jolted as the first drone swooped close, scanning in patterns that would have left the untrained eye dizzy. Phantom leaned slightly, her fingers brushing her headset, transmitting encrypted commands. The F-16 pilots who had previously retreated watched the unfolding scene with tense curiosity. They knew her abilities, they knew what she was capable of. And now, from the ground up, a new layer of threat had entered the theater. Inside the cabin, panic was creeping closer to the surface. A child whimpered, pressed against the window. A woman whispered prayers under her breath. But the calm in 17D was magnetic. Every passenger, whether aware or not, drew a subtle sense of stability from her presence. She was an anchor in the eye of a storm no one could see. Phantom's eyes scanned the horizon. The drones had formed a loose perimeter, attempting to herd the plane, guiding it like prey. Their movements were deliberate, tactical, and designed to test her response. She smirked faintly behind the sunglasses. "They're predictable," she muttered to herself. "Always predictable." Her fingers brushed the headset again, sending silent instructions to unknown allies. The outside formation shifted slightly, as though sensing the command. The F-16s on standby watched in disbelief. The civilian aircraft, under the control of one person they had long feared, had regained composure and maneuvered with precision. The captain leaned toward her, voice low. Who are you really?" Phantom's smile remained faint. She didn't answer immediately, letting the tension build. The passengers overheard fragments, sparking curiosity and fear. Military, secret agent. Why doesn't she panic? Finally, she spoke carefully, every word measured. "I am Phantom. That is all you need to know. My past, my missions, they're classified, not for civilian understanding. But what matters now is controlling this aircraft, keeping everyone safe and neutralizing the immediate threat. Everything else is irrelevant." Outside, one of the drones swooped aggressively closer. The plane tilted slightly, enough for the passengers to scream, clutching the seats. Phantom adjusted her position subtly, micro-correcting the tilt before it could become noticeable to anyone outside. The threat was real, but she was already 2 steps ahead. The F-16 pilots communicated in rapid bursts, their voices a mix of awe and disbelief. "She's handling it, no one else could." One muttered, "She retired years ago. No one thought she'd ever operate like this again." In the cabin, panic was mixed with curiosity. Passengers' eyes drifted constantly toward 17D. Who was she? Why was she here? And how had she just manipulated the plane's trajectory without touching the controls in a way anyone could see? The woman leaned back slightly, surveying the cabin. She allowed herself one small, controlled gesture, a soft flick of the wrist toward the captain. He understood instantly. "Follow my lead, trust every instruction, and do exactly as I say." His hands gripped the yoke tighter, nodding imperceptibly. The co-pilot mirrored him, a shared understanding passing silently between them. Another series of drones closed in, moving faster this time, more coordinated. They were no longer reconnaissance. This was escalation, a test of skill. Phantom's calm did not falter. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, speaking again into the headset. "All units disengage. This plane is under protection. Any further interference will be considered hostile." A tense silence followed. Even the drones hesitated. The F-16 pilots observed the tactical precision from above, astonished at how a single person on a civilian flight could command authority over multiple military-grade aircraft. Inside, passengers remained unaware of the full stakes. They felt the turbulence, the shifting plane, the tight coil of fear in their chests, but they did not yet understand why they were alive, or why the danger had suddenly halted. Phantom exhaled softly. The first wave of drones had been repelled, but the situation was far from resolved. A larger threat loomed, one she had anticipated but could not yet fully confront without revealing her identity further. The question was no longer whether she could protect them. It was whether the forces converging on Flight 781 would escalate beyond her control. Her hand rested lightly on the laminated card. Her eyes, sharp behind the sunglasses, scanned the instruments. Every passenger, every crew member, every passing second mattered. One wrong move, one hesitation, and the outcome would be catastrophic. And in that moment, as the night sky stretched endlessly outside, the passengers of Flight 781 were unknowingly at the center of a high-stakes game of skill, intelligence, and hidden power. A game controlled entirely by the woman they could only watch in awe and fear. Suspense ending. Phantom has neutralized the immediate drone threat, but larger dangers are converging, and the passengers are about to learn that their flight has become far more than a routine journey. The mystery of her identity deepens, and the stakes continue to rise. The night sky had deepened into near-complete darkness, a vast expanse dotted with the faint shimmer of distant stars. Flight 781 cut through it with precision, yet tension hummed through the cabin like a live wire. Passengers clutched their seats, whispered prayers under their breath, and tried desperately to make sense of the inexplicable calm of the woman in 17D. Phantom's presence radiated authority, a quiet force that held the storm of fear at bay. But the danger was far from over. The instruments beeped insistently as another wave of drones approached, faster, smarter, more coordinated. Phantom's eyes scanned the radar, every minute movement outside translated instantly into mental calculations. These were not standard reconnaissance drones. They were weaponized, tactical, and designed to probe weaknesses with lethal precision. She knew that the F-16s above had only delayed the inevitable. They had bought time, nothing more. The captain leaned forward, voice trembling. "Ma'am, they're coming faster. What do we do?" Phantom's fingers brushed the laminated card once more. "Stay calm. Keep the plane stable. Follow my instructions exactly. We are not at the mercy of these drones. They are at the mercy of a pilot who has danced on the edge of death more times than you could imagine." The co-pilot swallowed hard. Do we tell the passengers?" Phantom shook her head ever so slightly. "Not yet. Panic is the enemy. Control is everything." Outside, the first drone breached the perimeter. Its lights glinted ominously against the clouds, and a soft mechanical hum hinted at weaponry on board. The passengers instinctively leaned away from the windows, though they could not articulate why the shadows on the wing felt threatening. Phantom adjusted her headset, speaking in measured tones. "Falcon 6 to all units. Maintain current trajectory. Intercept only if necessary. This plane is under my authority. Any deviation will be considered hostile." The F-16 pilots above reacted immediately, forming a protective cordon around Flight 781. Their expressions betrayed a mix of awe and anxiety. They knew they were witnessing a level of control that even seasoned operators rarely saw. Phantom's single presence had transformed the civilian jet into a strategic stronghold, protected not by brute force, but by the precision of a mind honed for combat and survival. Inside the cabin, passengers felt a sudden jolt as turbulence struck harder than before. Drinks spilled over cup holders, luggage shifted in the overhead bins, and a child screamed. But Phantom's calm was absolute. She leaned slightly, adjusting her weight just enough to compensate for the minor pitch, and the plane steadied almost imperceptibly. The passengers remained oblivious to the true skill at work. A soft alarm blinked on the secondary radar. A drone had broken formation, maneuvering aggressively toward the aircraft's flank. Phantom's fingers flew over her headset, sending silent, encrypted commands. Within moments, the drone corrected its approach, repositioning under her control. Outside, the F-16s maintained their orbit, following her invisible signals. The captain exhaled slowly, eyes wide. I don't understand. How is she doing this?" Phantom's gaze swept the cabin. "Experience," she said simply. "Situational awareness. Anticipation. Most pilots react, I predict. Most threats are chaotic, I make them predictable. That is the difference between survival and disaster." The passengers were unsettled but could not look away. There was a magnetic pull in her presence, a sense that everything depended on her next move. Some whispered theories, government agent, ex-military, secret operative, but none could articulate the full truth. She was a living legend, a ghost in the machinery of war, operating in civilian space with deadly precision. Outside, the sky had become a chessboard of steel and light. Drones maneuvered aggressively, but each attempt to intimidate or intercept was countered with near-invisible adjustments from Phantom. The F-16 pilots above exchanged tense glances, Even they knew that the woman aboard this civilian flight was no ordinary operative. She had retired years ago, yet here she was, commanding not just respect, but deference from machines and humans alike. Suddenly, a new anomaly appeared, a larger unmarked aircraft, faster and lower than the drones, cutting directly across Flight 781's path. Its sensors were clearly tuned to detect anomalies, to track, to target. Phantom's jaw tightened ever so slightly. This was no reconnaissance, it was escalation. Whoever had deployed this asset was serious, testing her limits deliberately. Her hand hovered over the laminated card, tapping it lightly. The small gesture sent a chain of encrypted commands into a system no one on the plane could see or understand. The large aircraft hesitated mid-course, its trajectory subtly altered, guided by the unseen hand of Phantom. The cabin jolted again, and passengers gasped. A few cried out, panic rising with each micro-tilt of the plane. Phantom remained still, yet every adjustment she made was visible in the tiny corrections of the aircraft's path, every subtle shift stabilizing the plane against the encroaching threat. The captain, pale but focused, leaned toward her. "Ma'am, if this keeps escalating, can we survive?" Phantom met his gaze. Her voice was calm, unwavering, almost comforting. "We will. I've flown through situations like this before, worse. Trust the plane, trust me. That is all you need to do." The tension outside and inside reached a peak. The large, unmarked aircraft began to descend, its presence unmistakably threatening. Drones swarmed closer, and the F-16s flanked the jet like silent guardians, maintaining a protective perimeter. The passengers felt every shift, every vibration, every shadow, yet remained unaware that survival was being dictated entirely by one woman's decades of skill and instinct. Then, without warning, Phantom spoke into the cockpit's secondary intercom, voice low but carrying unmistakable authority. "Passengers of Flight 781, remain seated. Do not be alarmed by turbulence or lights outside. Everything is under control." Some turned to her, wide-eyed, trying to process her calm, her composure, her authority. But even as curiosity and fear mingled in their minds, the unseen battle above their heads intensified. Phantom's calm had kept them alive this far, but the most dangerous moments were still unfolding. And just as the passengers began to grasp the extraordinary nature of the woman in 17D, the large aircraft made a sudden, aggressive maneuver, closing in rapidly. Phantom's fingers moved over the controls of communication, sending silent commands. The F-16s reacted instantly, creating a wall of steel and fire that intercepted the threat, but the tension was palpable. Every passenger gripped their seats, unaware that their lives were literally hanging by threads controlled by a woman who had once been a ghost in the deadliest skis in the world. Suspense ending. The unmarked aircraft has engaged, the F-16s are now fully committed, and Phantom's legendary skills are the only thing keeping Flight 781 safe. The passengers are on the brink of discovering the full scale of danger, and the woman in 17D is about to reveal why she truly earned the call sign, Phantom. Flight 781 cut through the night like a silver arrow, the cabin trembling with every gust of air and flicker of light from outside. The passengers clutched their seats in terror, unaware of the scale of the battle unfolding above and around them. The large unmarked aircraft had descended aggressively, flanked by drones that moved with terrifying precision. The F-16s hovered like silent sentinels, waiting, calculating, but their hesitation was apparent. Every move had to be exact, because the woman in 17D was not just a passenger. She was the axis around which this storm of metal, speed, and danger pivoted. Phantom sat upright, sunglasses reflecting the faint glow of cabin lights, yet her eyes were sharp, calculating. Every micro-adjustment, every shift in the plane's angle, every command sent through encrypted channels was orchestrated with the precision of a master strategist. She wasn't just responding. She was anticipating, predicting, and manipulating events in ways no one else could. The captain leaned toward her, voice tight with tension. "Ma'am, they're closing in fast. That unmarked plane, they're not following the rules. What are we going to do?" Phantom's fingers brushed her laminated card once again. "Stay calm. Keep the plane level, trust me. The pilots outside know what they're dealing with. They will respond, but only if I give the signal." A sharp vibration shook the plane. A drone had darted closer than ever, scanning the fuselage with a precision that could penetrate the metal skin if it were armed. Passengers screamed, gripping armrests, some hiding their faces in fear. Phantom's hand moved lightly across the headset, and almost instantly the drone altered its course mid-flight. The F-16s, now fully engaged, created a protective perimeter, their pilots moving in unison with instructions that only they could receive from Phantom. She was controlling a ballet of machines and humans simultaneously, keeping the civilian aircraft stable, repelling the drones, and signaling the F-16s with flawless timing. One of the unmarked aircraft's lights flared, a warning, a test, a challenge. Phantom's lips curved in a faint, controlled smile. "Predictable," she whispered. "Always predictable." Passengers' fear was palpable. A young woman gasped. What is she doing?" she whispered to her husband. Her husband shook his head, eyes wide. I don't know, it's like she's controlling everything." He wasn't wrong. Phantom's presence was magnetic, terrifying in its calm efficiency. Every decision she made was a life-or-death calculation, executed with surgical precision. Outside, the unmarked plane made another aggressive maneuver, banking sharply to intercept Flight 781. Drones swarmed closer, but the F-16s reacted instantaneously, guided by Phantom's unseen hand. The cabin shuddered as another minor turbulence hit. The passengers' screams were drowned by the roar of engines outside, but inside, Phantom remained a steady force. She had been trained to operate under pressure, to manipulate outcomes where failure was not an option. Every second mattered. One hesitation, one miscalculation, and disaster would strike. She tapped the laminated card again, a gesture imperceptible to anyone but herself, sending precise instructions to the F-16s. The jets responded, weaving into an intricate defensive pattern. The unmarked plane's approach was repelled subtly but effectively, without the passengers ever realizing they had been moments from catastrophe. The captain's voice trembled. "Ma'am, you're not just controlling our plane, you're controlling them." Phantom's gaze swept the cabin, finally acknowledging the anxious eyes staring at her. She spoke calmly, deliberately, yet each word carried authority. "I am Phantom. That is all you need to know. What you see outside, those are professionals trained to react to my presence. Recognition is instinct. Hesitation is their acknowledgement of skill and authority. Trust me. Follow instructions. That is your only responsibility." The passengers murmured, a mixture of awe and fear in their voices. They had begun to understand that this was no ordinary passenger. They were witnessing a legend in action, a ghost of military operations that most of the world had never known existed. Outside, the unmarked aircraft tried another maneuver, faster, sharper, attempting to force Flight 781 off its course. Phantom adjusted her position slightly, her hand brushing the edge of her headset. The plane responded, micro-correcting to compensate. Every movement was precise, deliberate, invisible to the untrained eye but lethal in effect. The F-16 pilots above whispered among themselves, astonishment laced in their voices. "She's still the best," one murmured. "Even retired, she hasn't lost an edge." The drones had regrouped, forming a coordinated strike pattern. Phantom's mind raced. She calculated trajectories, fuel consumption, timing, and potential outcomes in a fraction of a second. She issued silent commands, guiding the F-16s to create a buffer while subtly adjusting the plane's flight path to neutralize immediate danger. In the cabin, passengers held their breath as the plane tilted again, their panic rising. Yet each adjustment, each jolt, was countered seamlessly by Phantom's control. She had become an invisible shield, a guardian whose skill was beyond comprehension. Then she allowed herself a small gesture, a shift in her posture that signaled to the F-16s that the time had come for a decisive action. Within moments, the unmarked aircraft was forced to retreat slightly, disrupted by a maneuver so precise it could have only been executed by someone with unmatched experience. The passengers' fear was replaced by a tentative sense of awe. The woman in 17D had not spoken much, but her presence alone commanded authority, control, and safety. The F-16s maintained their perimeter, drones backed off, and for the first time since the flight began, the immediate danger seemed to be contained. Phantom leaned back, scanning the cabin. Her eyes, sharp behind the sunglasses, met the gaze of a young man in the middle of the plane. He whispered almost to himself, Who is she?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. The woman smiled faintly. Phantom's secret was still hers alone, but the passengers would never forget the night a legend silently saved them from forces they didn't even know existed. Suspense ending. Phantom has neutralized the immediate threat and asserted complete control, but the mystery of why she is on this civilian flight and who orchestrated the attack remains unresolved. The passengers have glimpsed her power, but the story is far from over. The final confrontation is imminent. The cabin of Flight 781 hummed with tension as dawn approached, painting the sky in muted shades of orange and violet. Outside, the last of the drones had retreated, the unmarked aircraft had disappeared over the horizon, and the F-16s maintained a careful perimeter, their pilots exchanging glances of disbelief. Inside, passengers were shaken, their fear slowly transforming into a mixture of awe, confusion, and disbelief. None of them fully understood what had just occurred, but they had survived, and every second of their survival was owed to the woman in 17D. Phantom remained calm, her sunglasses reflecting the first light of morning. She had orchestrated every maneuver, predicted every threat, and neutralized every challenge with an expertise that bordered on the impossible. The laminated card on her lap was a symbol, a relic of a life most could only imagine, a past where her name commanded respect, fear, and obedience from the world's most elite pilots. The captain, still pale from the adrenaline, finally spoke. "Ma'am, I have to know. What are you? How did you do all of this?" Phantom's gaze met his, steady and unwavering. Her voice was soft but carried undeniable authority. "I am Phantom. That is the name the world gives me, though few are still alive who truly know me. I've flown in situations that don't exist on paper, missions that never make it to public record. I retired years ago, but my training, my skill, it doesn't retire." The co-pilot swallowed hard. "So, all those F-16s, the drones, you were controlling it all?" She nodded subtly. "I predicted every move, every tactic, every contingency. The threats were calculated, yes, but they underestimated one thing, the experience of a pilot who has seen death at Mach speeds and returned." A murmur passed through the cabin. Passengers exchanged bewildered glances. Some were wide-eyed, struggling to comprehend that a single woman, silently seated in their midst, had orchestrated the defense against an array of advanced military threats. Others whispered prayers of gratitude, shaking hands, unable to articulate the depth of relief and awe they felt. The child who had cried earlier now peeked from behind his mother, staring at 17D as if she were some kind of guardian angel. Phantom noticed him and offered the faintest, reassuring smile, enough to communicate protection without words. Her presence was magnetic, commanding yet protective, both terrifying and comforting at once. The captain cleared his throat, voice trembling. "But why this flight? Why now? Why reveal yourself in such a dramatic way?" Phantom's eyes swept the cabin before returning to the horizon. "I didn't choose the flight," she admitted. "I chose to intervene. There were threats that even the most sophisticated systems couldn't handle without escalation. Someone wanted to test civilian airspace, and I couldn't allow it to become a catastrophe. The passengers, your safety, was my responsibility. Outside, the F-16s maintained formation briefly before the lead pilot spoke over encrypted comms. Falcon 6, do you copy? Threat neutralized. Phantom tapped the headset. Copy, flight stable, all hostile elements disengaged. She turned to the captain. They won't follow further, but know this, if anyone had interfered recklessly, this plane would have been a target. That is why my presence was necessary. The co-pilot exhaled, relief flooding his voice. I've flown for decades, never seen anything like that. I can't imagine the level of skill. Phantom's lips curved into a faint smile. Skill isn't enough. Experience and anticipation are everything. Most pilots react, I predict. Most threats are chaotic, I neutralize them before they exist. Passengers began to settle, though whispers of disbelief and awe continued to ripple through the cabin. They had survived a scenario that would have overwhelmed even the most elite aircrews. And yet, the woman in 17D had remained serene, unflinching, commanding their safety with nothing more than presence, subtle movements, and decades of training. The child finally spoke, a small, odd voice. Are you a superhero? Phantom's smile softened slightly, and she inclined her head ever so subtly. Something like that, she said gently. The captain shook his head, marveling. I don't even know how to thank you. You saved everyone. You Phantom, you saved all of us. She leaned back in her seat, finally allowing herself a hint of relief. Her voice, low but deliberate, carried across the cabin once more. The world rarely knows the battles that protect it. Most threats never make it into the headlines. Most heroes work in silence. Today, this flight, this is the world you know. But the reality is far more dangerous than you can imagine. The F-16s broke formation gradually, signaling their return to base. The unmarked aircraft was gone. The threat was neutralized. The dawn sky bathed Flight 781 in a gentle glow, masking the terror of the night and highlighting the surreal calm of the cabin. Passengers slowly began to speak to each other, disbelief and relief intermingling. Did that woman just control everything? One whispered. Some kind of military agent, another muttered. And the F-16s, a third added, they obeyed her how? Phantom's gaze swept the cabin one last time, acknowledging their awe without revealing more than necessary. She had done her job. The passengers were safe, alive, and largely oblivious to the full scope of the danger they had endured. But for those few seconds, the story of Phantom had unfolded before them, a story of skill, courage, and precise command that few could ever comprehend. The captain finally said, almost to himself, I will never fly another flight without thinking of you. Phantom's eyes softened. And you never should. The skis are vast and the dangers are real. Respect them, respect those who protect them, and never forget that sometimes the most powerful guardians are unseen. A soft chuckle escaped her lips as the plane leveled out, gliding smoothly through the first light of morning. She reclined slightly, allowing herself a moment of stillness. Her mission had been executed perfectly, and the world, its passengers, its pilots, remained largely unaware of the peril they had survived. The cabin lights dimmed, passengers exhaled in relief, and for a fleeting moment the air was calm. Phantom's sunglasses reflected the sunrise as the plane continued its journey. She had emerged from the shadows, performed a near-impossible feat, and returned to silence. The legend remained intact. Final suspense ending. Flight 781 is safe. The external threats are gone. Phantom has vanished into quiet anonymity once more, but the passengers, forever changed, will never forget the woman who silently saved their lives. And somewhere in the shadows, a new threat is forming, knowing that Phantom is alive and that the game is far from over.